Welcome to Backstage Pass with me, Carlos Miguel Prieto, with insights on this week's program with your North Carolina Symphony. This program is an all Beethoven program. And why is it? Because Beethoven has so much variety, so much interest, so much challenge, and finally, so much genius. This program is specifically based on a time which we call the middle period of Beethoven. The early Beethoven is still a classical kind of composer, very much in the style of Mozart, where form is very important. And that's what we call in classical music the classical period. The second period, which is the middle period, is where Beethoven started to completely get away from many preconceived ideas about form, and he starts to break from the mold of having a composer write the music in order to please a specific patron or a specific institution, such as the church, for example, or nobility. The symphonies that start from the third all the way to, I would say, the seventh are the middle period symphonies. Within this middle period, the Symphony No. 4, which is the ending of this program, is a very important work. The Violin Concerto is a central work, and Fidelio Overture is also an important work since it is the overture to his only opera, the opera called Fidelio. So this is not only an all Beethoven program, it's an all Beethoven middle period program, which actually pinpoints into a specific time of his life, which is full of genius, but also full of torment. So in this program, we start with Fidelio Overture. So why is Fidelio Overture interesting? First of all, because it is the original overture to the opera called Fidelio. Now you will ask, what is he talking about? Well, Beethoven was dissatisfied with his overture for Fidelio and wrote not only one more, he wrote three more. But this is the original overture, which is a shortish, it's about 7 minutes. And I think that perhaps what disappointed Beethoven is that this overture is too traditional in form and perhaps does not have the length or the musical complication of some of the Leonoras. However, I always loved this work, and I think it's a great way to open a middle period Beethoven program. Immediately after that, we will do one of the cherished, one of the great violin concertos of the literature. Now, I think I've talked about this in the past, that we talk about the great three, or violinists talk about the great three. But within that, I would say that Beethoven even has its own place as perhaps the most majestic, the most perfect, and the most inspired of the violin concertos. Everything about this piece is special. From the opening, which is a strike of genius with 4 notes by the timpani, it is already playing a melody. So that's a stroke of genius. Then the whole introduction, which is a very symphonic introduction, is an amazing creation. The opening of the violins with the famous octaves, which are so hard to play in tune and so hard to play. This concerto, one of the great difficulties is the purity of sound, the purity of the intonation, the purity and the uniqueness of the phrasing. So whenever a violinist is playing Beethoven, they are always aware that they are being asked to be at the top of the game. The first movement is a majestic, it's a long symphonic movement. The second movement is one of the most inspired slow movements that he ever wrote. You know, he made actually a whole career of inspired second movements, but within the concerti, I could say that the slow movement of the violin concerto, along with, in my opinion, the slow movement of the third, fourth, and fifth piano concertos, are in a league of their own. And then the last movement is another example of what we call the rondo form. So rondo form sounds very academic, but in reality it's very simple. In the rondo form, Beethoven and Mozart, who loved rondos, use the fact that our ear has already latched to a melody to capture our attention by restating this melody, very often in the same exact way, but often with some slight changes. But this movement is a typical rondo form of a concerto. The whole Beethoven is an experience. So I invite you to enjoy this program, especially because I know our soloist very well. Paul Huang is his name. And Paul has a very special voice for Beethoven. 3 years ago, he and I did this in Mexico, where we repeat the program many times. He was absolutely marvelous every single time. And then after intermission is his symphony, Beethoven Symphony No. 4. So let's go back to the idea of these 9 symphonies. So many people ask me, what's your favorite of the 9 symphonies? Well, my problem is I don't have a favorite because I see the symphonies as a whole. So I've been able to do the symphonies as a whole for about a dozen times in my life. And if I've learned something, it's how to appreciate each one on their own, but each one in relationship to each other. So whenever I'm doing the fourth, I'm always conscious about the third, which is nice because we're doing the third this same season. And I'm also very conscious about the fifth, which we just did last season. So the Fourth Symphony has a beautiful introduction that pays homage to Haydn, and then goes into a movement of great, great vitality. I won't describe the whole symphony since you will be at the concert and enjoy it. But if I were you, I would invite you to listen to other symphonies, and as soon as you get home, listen to the third, listen to the fifth, and then listen again to the fourth and see if you understand what I mean. So the fourth is kind of a parenthesis between the third and the five, but a beautiful parenthesis, a beautiful, really a perfect piece that everyone in the orchestra loves doing. I've done it very, very often in this same situation in a middle period program, and it works wonderfully. I am sure that you will enjoy this, and I would invite you that if you enjoyed this program to kind of become acquainted with this idea I gave you about the late, the middle, and the early. Beethoven, having been one of the greatest geniuses ever, warrants this kind of interest, warrants this kind of work, because he is also intimately connected with the world around him. He was the first composer, as I said, to consider himself an artist independent of church or independent of nobility. He writes for you and for me, so that in itself is already a show of artistic independence and a show of what we call the Romantic period, where artists were for art's sake rather than at the service of someone. Beethoven fascinates me, and I'm so happy that this will not be the only program that has Beethoven, and I will speak about this in the next time that we have his Eroica Symphony. Meanwhile, enjoy this beautiful middle period of Beethoven program. Thanks for joining us for Backstage Pass. For information on more concerts, visit ncsymphony.org.